I pulled up an old photograph of Manhattan from the year 1900, and something surprised me immediately. The island looks flat, almost low to the ground. There is no famous silhouette, no Empire State, and no Chrysler. Now fast forward 30 years, and the same view is completely unrecognizable.
So with the help of AI, let us walk through those 30 years and watch New York go vertical right before our eyes.
Before we start the timeline, you need to understand why this transformation even happened. Manhattan went vertical for 3 connected reasons. Transport got dramatically faster, land got insanely valuable, and companies figured out that building tall could actually be profitable. New bridges and subway lines widened the daily map, which meant office districts could grow not just outward but upward. And then came the single most important rule of the entire era. In 1916, New York adopted the country's first citywide zoning code, which pushed tall buildings toward stepped setbacks to protect light and air on the streets below. That one law quietly created the famous stepped-back skyline style people still associate with classic New York. Without it, the city would look entirely different today. In 1900, Manhattan's vertical center of gravity was still firmly downtown, clustered around the financial district. The Park Row building, completed in 1899 at approximately 391 feet, held the title of the city's tallest building at the time. It would hold the title of New York's tallest building all the way until 1908, which tells you how early the Skyline race really was. The city already looked ambitious and modern compared to most of America, but it had not yet started the full sprint upward. Everything that was about to happen was still just a blueprint in someone's office. Then, in February 1902, plans began for the Flatiron Building, and the location was the whole point of the story. It was going up north of Union Square, far from the traditional financial district, and that choice proved something important. Tall buildings could follow business uptown instead of staying locked into lower Manhattan. By October 1st, 1902, the Flatiron was ready for occupancy, giving Midtown its first real vertical symbol. That same year, something else happened that seemed unrelated but mattered enormously. On January 8, 1902, a deadly train collision in the Park Avenue Tunnel pushed public demand for electric trains and a completely rebuilt rail hub at 42nd Street. That decision sounds distant from skyscrapers, but it planted the seed of the future skyline that would eventually rise around Grand Central Terminal. On June 19, 1903, construction began on Grand Central Terminal, kicking off the long rebuild that would eventually support an entire generation of towers above its underground tracks. Then, in December 1903, the Williamsburg Bridge opened, pulling more daily movement into Manhattan from Brooklyn than ever before. Neither project created a skyline overnight, but they both fed the districts that would soon explode upward. Bridges brought commuters, and commuters demanded office space, and office space meant taller buildings. 1904 was the year when the future skyline became truly unavoidable. In April, Longacre Square was officially renamed Times Square, centered around the newly built One Times Square Tower, and Midtown suddenly had a new public focus point. Then, on October 27, 1904, the first regularly operated New York City subway line opened for service, and the entire island instantly felt faster and more connected. If I had to pick one single year where the skyline's future was locked in, it would be this one. Tall office districts cannot exist without fast movement, and 1904 delivered the movement. Through 1905, the new subway system kept tightening Manhattan's core. It reached Fulton Street on January 16th, Wall Street on June 12th, and South Ferry on July 10th. Meanwhile, construction was already underway on what would become the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company Tower, a project that treated height as a statement of reputation as much as a real estate investment. Then, on March 12, 1906, the subway extended further, reaching a temporary terminus at 221st Street and Broadway on the west side. This mattered because office districts grow taller when workers can live farther away and still get to work on time. The subway was quietly building the workforce that future skyscrapers would eventually need. In 1907, city planners selected a design for what would become the Manhattan Municipal Building, a massive government office project tied to a major transit terminal near the Brooklyn Bridge. Even New York's own government was now expecting to work in skyscraper-scale space, which says something powerful about where the city thought it was heading. Then, on May 1st, 1908, the Tower of the Singer building opened, and at roughly 612 feet, it became the tallest building in the world. On June 23, 1908, its observation deck opened to the public, letting ordinary New Yorkers look down on their own city like it was a map laid out beneath them. This was the year the Skyline turned into a genuine public fascination, not just a business tool. 1909 delivered another leap forward. The Metropolitan Life Tower was completed that year and immediately claimed the title of world's tallest building, which it would hold until 1913. The same year brought two major bridges to the city. The Queensboro Bridge opened to the public on March 30, 1909, connecting Manhattan to Queens across the East River. Then, on December 31, 1909, the Manhattan Bridge opened to traffic, adding yet another crossing between Manhattan and Brooklyn. A taller skyline and stronger connections were arriving together, which is exactly how Manhattan has always been built. 1910 brought Midtown its grandest entrance yet. The original Pennsylvania station opened in stages that year, with full service beginning on November 27, 1910. It was a breathtaking Beaux-Arts temple of steel and glass that served as the city's new western gateway. Downtown, another wave of financial towers was also beginning. Construction kicked off that year on 14 Wall Street, part of a new generation of vertical investments in the financial district. The Skyline was now developing two distinct centers, and that split between downtown and midtown would shape the next 20 years of the story. But not every part of this era was about glamour and progress. On March 25, 1911, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire claimed 146 workers, most of them young immigrant women, in one of the worst workplace disasters in American history. The tragedy forced massive reforms in New York State. Investigations led to new laws covering exits, fireproofing, alarms, sprinklers, and general working conditions inside tall buildings. It is a grim but essential part of the Skyline story, because it fundamentally changed how towers were regulated and operated going forward. Every safe modern office building traces part of its safety code back to that horrific day. On May 1, 1912, 14 Wall Street opened, adding a sharp new silhouette to Lower Manhattan's financial district. The Manhattan Bridge also began carrying streetcars that same year, transforming it from a simple roadway into a more complete transportation link. Then came 1913, a truly historic year for the city. On February 2, 1913, Grand Central Terminal finally opened to the public after a decade of construction, and it immediately became an anchor for Midtown development because the air rights above its tracks could be sold off and turned into building sites. Just a few months later, on April 24, 1913, the Woolworth building opened its doors and captured the title of world's tallest building. Its Gothic crown dominated the downtown horizon for years and became known as the Cathedral of Commerce. In 1914, the Manhattan Municipal Building was completed as a major government skyscraper built to handle the office space needs of a bigger, consolidated New York City. It helped normalize the idea that vertical construction was not just for private business, but also for the public sector. Then, on May 1, 1915, the Equitable Building was completed in Lower Manhattan, and it changed everything. The building was so massive and so bulky that it cast enormous shadows across neighboring streets, blocking sunlight from reaching the sidewalks for entire blocks. Public outrage over those shadows helped push the city toward serious zoning reform. The skyline was still rising, but New Yorkers were realizing they needed rules to keep the streets themselves livable. On July 25, 1916, New York officially adopted the Building Zone Resolution, the first citywide zoning code in the United States. The law linked building height and setbacks directly to street width, meaning towers could still rise to great heights, but they had to step back as they climbed upward. This is the moment when the famous stepped skyline became a legal requirement, not just a design style. Architects now had to think in terms of a new shape logic, and that logic would dominate every major building that came after it for decades to come. Through 1917, the zoning system was already being amended and refined. The city was tuning the skyline's rules in real time, and architects adapted to the new requirements. By 1918, no major tallest building headlines emerged, a clue that the skyline's drama had shifted phases. The Woolworth building remained the world's tallest reference point. Then, on January 28, 1919, the Commodore Hotel opened next to Grand Central Terminal, helping turn the area into a full Midtown district. The skyline began feeling less like one downtown cluster and more like multiple rising centers. Once hotels cluster around transit, height follows. Around 1920, things didn't look dramatic yet, but behind the scenes, architects were quietly figuring out how to turn zoning laws into style, not just rules. By 1922, even infrastructure like the Manhattan Bridge expansion was pushing more people into the city. And more people meant one thing: build higher. Then, by 1923 and 1924, you could actually see the change. Projects like the American Radiator Building started rising, and suddenly, New York had a whole new look. By 1925, 1926, the pace of construction was at its peak. Buildings like the Barclay VZ were constructed at an astonishing speed, with offices filling up, phones ringing, and elevators moving, transforming the skyline into a vibrant, dynamic environment. 1927 brought another major opening. The Graybar Building opened in April, built above Grand Central's tracks and shaped with dramatic setbacks to meet the zoning code. That same year, the Department of Buildings officially signed off on the Barclay VZ building's completion, closing the loop on one of the earliest full Art Deco skyscraper cycles. Then, in 1928, Midtown's confidence showed itself in steel and stone across Park Avenue. The New York Central Building topped out on April 5, 1928, reinforcing the idea that the rail terminal district was now a major skyline center in its own right. The Chrysler Building began construction on January 19, 1928, and topped out on October 23 of the same year, pulling the world's attention back to Midtown. The skyline was no longer just rising. It was actively moving north and spreading into brand new vertical clusters. In 1929, Manhattan returned to open competition for the title of the world's tallest building, and the dates line up like a tightly scripted drama. Then, in late October 1929, the stock market crashed in the events still associated with October 24th and October 29th. The economic collapse was historic, yet incredibly, the high rate continued. And then came 1930, the year the skyline hit a clean headline moment with dates that still feel almost magical. 40 Wall Street was completed on May 1st, 1930, and officially opened on May 26th, standing for a very brief stretch as the world's tallest building. But just one day later, on May 27th, 1930, the Chrysler Building officially opened to the public and immediately claimed the title of world's tallest building. Its gleaming stainless steel Art Deco crown is locked in a silhouette that people still recognize instantly, all over the world, almost a century later. In just 30 years, Manhattan transformed from a flat, low-slung island into the most dramatic skyline on the planet. Luck or a single genius did not construct the skyline we still photograph today. It was built year by year, decision by decision, rivet by rivet, between 1900 and 1930.
Thanks for walking through this evolving skyline with me. If the story pulled you in, hit that like button and subscribe.
And drop a comment telling me which city or era you are keen to explore next. Thank you, and see you soon.